Welcome back on this Wednesday. We are moving from the past section and on to one of what I think is the most important chapters in the book of Corinthians. It is one of the most theological as it really focuses on the resurrection. Let's begin with the first two verses of 1 Corinthians 15. Now I would remind you, brothers, of the gospel I preached to you, which you received, in which you stand, by which you are being saved, if you hold fast to the word I preached to you, unless you believed in vain. These first two verses transition us away from the whole thing about spiritual gifts and back to the main point, back to the gospel message, as Paul says, by which you are being saved. Called to hold fast to the word that he preached to them. Again, connecting back to the end of chapter 14, his authority as an apostle, unless you believed in vain. In other words, unless you have given up and do not any longer believe. Let's continue. For I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day in accordance with the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas, then to the 12. Then he appeared to more than 5,000 brothers at one time, most of whom are still alive, though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles. Last of all, as to one untimely born, he appeared also to me. For I am the least of the apostles, unworthy to be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church of God. But by the grace of God, I am what I am, and his grace toward me was not in vain. On the contrary, I worked harder than any of them, though it was not I, but the grace of God that is with me. Whether then it was I or they, so we preached, and you believed. He gives at the beginning of this, the first couple verses, a quick summary of the gospel. What is the gospel? That Christ died for our sins in accordance with the Scriptures. Again, connecting that this is more than just a fad that came up or someone that has no spiritual backing, but it was according to the Scriptures. And then he rose again from the dead according to the Scriptures. The summary of the gospel is Christ's death for our sins, his resurrection for our life. And then he starts talking about the witnesses. In some ways, this is the beginning of a creed, you could say, as he talks about who Jesus is, what he did, and how he appeared. The proofs then that Jesus gave to his resurrection. To Cephas, then the 12, then to more than 500, to James, then to all of the apostles, showing all of those witnesses. This is kind of a macro, an overview of all the people who saw Jesus after he was raised. And then Paul moves to a micro view, just his point of view. Beginning in verse 9, or verse 8, last of all, as to one untimely born, he appeared to me also. The past he focuses on, how he persecuted the church, but yet how by God's grace made him able to proclaim with the result of faith of others. Verse 11, after he goes through all of this, he ends it with this understanding of the importance of faith, not the person. Remember, we talked about that a couple times, all the way back in the first couple chapters, not Paul or Apollos or Cephas, but he says, whether then it was I or they, so we preached and you believed. It's about the word that goes out to create the faith in the hearts. It's not about the individual, but it's about God and his work, his grace that is being shown. come back tomorrow. We're going to continue with the next few verses of this great chapter. I hope to see you then.